Greetings, my very good friends. You're welcome to episode 6 of our current teaching series, Into the Mind of God, the Basics. I'm very delighted for the things we intend to discuss today. But before we get into it, I want to ask you 6 questions. I want to share with you 6 questions that I want you to take to your mind very seriously and try to answer the questions, because I think that in trying to answer them, they will help you relate the information we are sharing, the revelation we are sharing, the deep and powerful blueprints from our Creator for life. It will help you relate all that to your own personal life and how it applies practically in your everyday life. So, question number 1, I want you to imagine a spectrum on which on one end there is total chaos, tohu vafuhu, and turmoil on one end, and on the other end of the spectrum there is order and prosperity. And which where along that line would some aspects of your life, because there could be aspects of your life that is located more towards the other side of the spectrum, and there could be aspects of your life that is located more towards the chaos side of the spectrum. And as we've begun to discuss that, you already have an idea on what chaos is or what chaos looks like. But the more we're going to go further into the teaching, and like for the things we're going to discuss today, you're going to have a clearer understanding of where some aspects of your life is located along that spectrum. And that will be good news, because then you're going to know what to do to shift it more away from the chaos side to the side of order. And question number 2, what part of your life needs an infusion or an injection of energy to cause that aspect of your life to flourish? Now, we haven't spoken much about energy yet, but we've introduced it and we said chaos. Chaos is a natural and the default state of things. Order doesn't just happen accidentally. Order doesn't happen randomly. Order happens due to energy and intelligence that human beings infuse into things. Now, so you might want to think now of which aspects of your life requires an infusion of energy, whether this energy is intelligent action in terms of activating the blueprints of the Creator for your life. And question number 3 is what generational trends do you see around you that needs resisting or embracing? Like, what generational trends, like societal trends, that do you see around you that you either need to resist or embrace? This is important because there are lots of trendy things in the world today, trendy things in theology, in philosophy, in education, and so on and so forth. Question number 4. Question number 4 is are you making most decisions of your life based on wisdom? That's your intellect plus God's guidance. And when I say God's guidance, I'm referring to God's blueprint for reality, God's revelation. Are you using that with your intellect to make decisions, or are your decisions primarily instigated by your emotions or your bodily urges, as we've discussed last week when we began to talk about the various acronyms of what the name Lamech represents? Question number 5. Can you think of trends or issues where the first step seems positive and time has shown and proven it to be dreadful or destructive or a horrible mistake? Can you think of anything like that in your life or in your society or in the environment that you grew up in, things that were once believed and held to be true, but now in hindsight we can look at it and say, oh, that was horrible, that was an atrocious belief or step. And may I just butt in at this point to say something, that you want to think about your life when you want to, if you want to be wise as to how you look at life and as to how you judge things in life, you want to look at life more with the perspective of a video camera than from the perspective of a photo camera. What do I mean by that? For instance, you could step on Facebook, Instagram, or any of those places and you see pictures of happy couples, happy people, or you could just be walking the street and you see two people that you know and they appear very happy and wonderful, and you look like they have it all and you want to have their lives and so on. But you do not know what you're just seeing is a photograph of that moment. But if you were to watch a video of their lives, how they woke up that morning and didn't speak to each other and they're quarreling at home and they are fighting, you would have a more different understanding of what is actually going on in those people's lives. Photos can be very deceiving. Photos can tell a lot of lies. For example, you could go to a beach and you could see two couples very happy, like raptured in love and affection for each other. And if you don't follow up the video, you might not know that one couple, they're going to go back home to their happy kids and their loving home, while the other couple is married, each of the individuals in the other couples are married to other people, and they will separate along the way and go to their respective partners after their horrible deeds. Videos tell a truer story than photos. And so when you think of your life as a video and you think of not just your life, everything that you access around you, you might find that there were children that were your friends when you were kids, that when you were growing up, when their parents spoiled them with everything they asked for, and their parents defended them in everything they did, even when they were clearly on the wrong. Now, if you take just photos of those children's lives, it would seem as if at that point in life they had it all. But if you follow the video, you might see at the end of the story that things turn out quite badly for them. So, question number 6. Did I give question number 6? Okay, question number 6, that can you think of times in your life when you thought that God was unfair to you, God was not even caring for you, he was treating you very harshly, but in hindsight, you can see that God was actually being merciful to you and saving you from big trouble. Maybe something you desperately wanted and needed. You prayed and you fasted and you did everything you thought and knew how to do to get God help you, but God seemed indifferent and God seemed harsh and cruel towards you. But now you could look at it and say, oh, thank God, I didn't get that. Thank God my prayers were not answered. Can you think of any of that in your life? Now, I want you to hold these questions in your mind. I want you to ponder them as we move further into the teaching. Now, there's one question I'll give you later because the question isn't something we are yet to treat. Okay, now, so what are some of the things we discussed in the previous teaching? Let me take it at least 2 minutes or at most 2 minutes to recap on the things we discussed in the previous teaching before we delve into the things I'd like for us to discuss today. We ended with the two Lamechs, one of the Lamechs that was the guy that tried to separate the benefits of sex from reproduction. And then the other Lamech is the guy who tries to separate the benefits of work from work. Now, does that sound familiar? Today we have an ultra grace movement and a battery of prosperity preachers that are doing the same thing, trying to separate the benefits of work from work. And they are selling us a snake oil revelation that basically says that you can have everything without having to work or to earn them. And when we're going to look at Noah as to why he found favor before God, was it that Noah was just one empty-handed, wretched beggar who had no merit before God and God just had grace on him? Like some of the grace preachers who want us to believe that we should come before God wretched, empty-handed, with absolutely no merit of our own, and then God will just show us unlimited grace. And these prosperity teachers and these grace teachers are following the same error of Lamech. And what advice or what caution can we have for them is that there are people like that who destroy the world. And so So those are some of the things we observe. And the same thing with reproduction. We have a culture today that is extremely bizarre. We have things like Tinder and all the other adult friendly something. What is the name of that other useless app? Was it a website? Uh, what's the name? Oh God, adult friend finder or something like that. Whatever those names are, there are a lot of them. And these are just apps where they actually broadcast themselves and project themselves that their goal is to make it easy for you to find someone to have casual sex with. You don't even have to know the person's name. You don't even have to have any exchange, like get to know each other. No, it's not important. You just meet and you get the act done. And that's the culture that people have sex with people that they cannot stand, or they cannot even imagine that person be the father or the mother of the children. May I have an advice for some of you young ones listening to me now? Don't have sex with anybody that you won't want that person to be the father or the mother of your children. Don't. Anyway, so and don't buy the error of prosperity and grace teachers, because they happen to put a religious ring around their message, but it's just as evil and as destructive. And because we are only looking at the things that these prosperity preachers and grace preachers are teaching through the lenses of a photo camera instead of a video camera, because if we look at it through a photo camera, we can see a lot of benefits that people seem to be reaping from that system of belief. But if we are going to trace this thing 50 years from now, 100 years from now, we're going to see the chaos it's going to bring on the world, just like when Lamech started. It was just a simple, seemingly harmless idea. But when we look further, we see that it became extremely destructive. It actually unleashed terror, turmoil on the world. A biblical blueprint, like we began to examine last week, ensures provides stability and predictability. None of us will have a good time living in a world that is not predictable. By the way, we live in a culture where predictability means boring. If you say, oh, he is so predictable, could be the worst compliment that could ever be made for a young man or for a young woman. We live in a culture that prides itself in being unpredictable. If you're an unpredictable person, then you're fun, because no one knows what to expect next from you. It might be fun in some contexts to have some unpredictability. Unpredictability, it can be harmless when it has to do with little things like a surprise birthday party or a nice gesture for your wife, from your wife or your partner or somebody. But unpredictability can only go so far, because when you start getting into serious things, let's imagine, for example, the laws of a country being unpredictable, where no one really knows what is right, when no one really knows what is wrong for sure, until the police officer meets you and then you discover that you're doing something wrong. Or let's take, for instance, that the laws of a country are so predictable that something that was right yesterday is absolutely wrong today, and something that was so wrong yesterday is right today. Out of a sudden, arbitrarily, the laws just keep changing unpredictably. What if, for example, that you got on the road and the driving was so unpredictable that you did not know whether the person driving in front of you was going to stop at the red light or not, or whether the person that has to cross the road from the other end would respect the red light or not? What if the world was so unpredictable that people just surprised people with their behaviors, good and bad? Nobody can live like that. Imagine being in a relationship with an unpredictable person. It's like walking on eggshells. A person with a hot temper or short temper, that 1 minute their mood suddenly changes from the smiley face to a grumpy, angry person. I mean, the people that somebody you could just be talking with, 1 minute they're happy and the next minute their face is gloom and doom on their face that can peel off the paint on the wall. You cannot handle an unpredictable person. How about you, if you were a child that grew up with an unpredictable parent, a parent that changed his mode every second? You didn't know what to expect from them. 1 minute you could do something and they praise you for doing that thing, and the next day you do exactly the same thing and they almost destroy you for doing it. Just unpredictability. The same thing in a relationship. Imagine that you're dating somebody that is very unpredictable, or you're married, unfortunately, to somebody that's very unpredictable, that constantly keeps changing the idea of what commitment means. Today, commitment means this, and tomorrow, conveniently, commitment means something else. Predictability doesn't work. We all want predictability. We all want stability. We all want order. We don't want a world where every day we got to revisit the foundations of the foundations of our morality to discuss whether things are right or wrong, and so on. Now, if you were a young man, for instance, and then you are trying to court a high quality young woman to marry her, one of the best things you can do to win her affection is to provide stability and order. You want to show to her that you're a man that knows who you are, that knows where you're going in life, that will provide an environment of predictability, and she would know what to expect from you at every turn and in everything, and what not to expect from you. As simply put, you provide stability and predictability. You're more likely to win a high quality woman like that. But if you was a low class girl, you provide stability and predictability, she will turn you to be boring and dull, and you're just not for her. And so if you should be lucky to walk away from a girl like that. She's not for you, truly. So order results from predictability, and what a biblical blueprint provides is that predictability. Most of us see it and we imagine in our minds that if they send us, like, say, 1,000 years back in time to meet a community of people, we're going to be the smartest people on the planet. We'll be smarter than everybody else because we know physics, we know computers, we know iPhones, and we know all those stuffs. But the truth is, we do not know more than those people about the spiritual aspects of life. And I made this difference in the first part and second part of the teaching, the series, that the spiritual knowledge declines the more the generation goes further away from the Garden of Eden. And we're going to talk about what the Garden of Eden is. One of the names in Hebrew of the Garden of Eden actually means, literally translates to the Garden of Time. And we're going to look at this. So the more we move away from the Garden of Eden, the more we move away from Adam, spiritual knowledge declines. And if you have not listened to teaching 1 and 2 of this series, you should go listen to it, where I differentiated for spiritual and physical knowledge. But the more we move away and we exercise our minds, like I explained in that teaching, and learn, the newer generations coming know more about the natural world, the physical world, than the previous generations. So you might know a lot about the physical world if you travel back to time, in time, 1,000 years, but you will not necessarily know more about the spiritual world, the spiritual realities of life. And mind you, when I say spiritual, I'm saying it in the way I defined it in teaching 1 and 2. So you should go listen to that. Now, so we're going to get into the things right away, into the things that I like for us to discuss today. And speaking of predictability, it's very important if you are raising children to provide an atmosphere of predictability. You want the children to be clear on what is right and on what is wrong, on what you expect from them and what you don't expect. It's very important to raise healthy children. If you're going to raise healthy children, you need to provide predictability and stability. So we're going to begin with, let's go, as I said, and I think I mentioned this before already, that the first Sedra of the Bible, Sedra Bereshit, answers the question that can we human beings on our own, by following our own thinking, build a world where there will be prosperity, order, and stability, and goodwill, or collaboration with everybody that is involved. Can we human beings, following our own thinking, our own intelligence, our own laws of our own originating with our intelligence, build a world that is stable, it's orderly, it's prosperous, and that is collaboration, healthy collaboration of all the entities involved? Can we? The answer is what the first Sedra of the Bible answers that question, and it answers the question with an absolute no. And we're going to see how human beings, by following their own thinking, brought chaos in the world. And so we're going to discuss more about this, that could human beings ever come up with the laws like the laws we have in the Ten Commandments? Most people will agree that those are pretty good laws, a lot of them. I mean, you would rarely meet the person that has a problem with the laws in the Ten Commandments. Let's say thou shalt not kill. Let me be specific. Thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not lie, and all that stuff. The problem is that, can intelligent people on their own come out with laws like that? Well, if you know anything, you will know that the answer is absolutely no. Intelligent people, let's take a simple case, for example, thou shalt not murder, you shall not kill. Intelligent people are still finding it hard to decide what that means. First of all, define murder. Does it mean that when a child is in the womb is not murder? Or how about when the child just comes out from the womb, maybe just few hours? Is it okay to kill it? Or how about old people that are sick and they are on life support and they have no economic value to anyone, and some people would see them like they're leeching the economy and so on? How about just getting those people out of the misery and getting everyone else out of the misery? How about people that are born greatly handicapped? Will it be murder to get rid of those people? But actually, one of the most smartest people today, lecturing in what is known as your Ivy League universities, think that all these things I've just mentioned, to kill those people, is not murder. So you see that intelligent people would not. Somebody like Hitler was a very, very intelligent man, but he killed lots of people. And very brilliant people tend to have a very murderous tendency, because they, being intelligent, have the tendency to justify their behavior than somebody that is not. And so this is what the first Sedra of the Bible answers. It shows us the need of a biblical blueprint, and it shows us what happens when we, as a community, as a society of people, and eventually as individuals, reject a biblical blueprint. Now, right away, let's go to Bereshit chapter 6 verse 1. We're going to look at the last few verses of that Sedra. Like I told you, the Sedra ends, Sedra Bereshit, the first Sedra of the Bible, ends at Genesis 6 verse 1. So sorry, it's Genesis 6 verse 8. So Genesis 6 verse 9 is actually the first verse of the second Sedra. So we're going to look at the last 8 verses of the first Sedra. Now, we are not following Stephen Langton's chapter divisions, because if we're in Stephen Langton's chapter divisions, then Genesis chapter 6 verse 1 will be the beginning of another story, but which continues right up to the end. But then it's actually the continuation of a story that began in Genesis chapter 1 verse 1. So let's continue. Genesis chapter 6 verse 1. I'm going to read the first verse. It says that, and it came to pass, when men began to become many, and daughters were born to them. It says, well, it came to pass when men began to become many on the face of the earth. It was when men began to become many, and daughters were born to them. Now, there are a few strange things that appears in this verse. Like I've told you that in Hebrew, every word, every dot matters. The scripture doesn't waste words. It doesn't tell us things that we should have known. It doesn't just give us redundant, unnecessary information. It's not like Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, or Shakespeare's plays and his writings. No, it's actually the blueprint of reality, a powerful blueprint from God. It's like a manual of a nuclear power plant. Every sentence matters. So I'll read it again. It says, when men began, I want you to take note of that word began. In Hebrew is the word hechel. When men began to become, or when men, hechel, began to become many, the word for many is larof. Now I want you to take note of that word. Over the face of the earth, and daughters were born to them. Now, before we talk about what hechel and larov means in Hebrew, this is oddity in this verse. It tells us that, and daughters were born to them. Now, why does it tell us this information? We already know that daughters were born to them. Genesis chapter 5 verse 26, it talks about Enoch gave birth to sons and daughters. Sorry, 5 verse 22, it talks about Enoch giving birth to sons and daughters. 5 verse 26, it talks about Methuselah who begat sons and daughters. And 5 verse 30, it talks about Lamech himself who begat sons and daughters. So sons and daughters were born to men since Adam. So what is this information here about sons and daughters were born to them? Duh, we already know that. So why tell us this? What is the purpose of this information? Now, as you're going to see, this is not just a simple fact. Something powerful is being conveyed here by this little piece of information, and daughters were born to them. Hakel in Hebrew, it's a very interesting word that not only can it be translated that began, as it's translated in most of our English translations, it is a word that also suggests a renouncement and trashing of tradition, an abandoning of the wisdom of the past, and forging a brand new path with all its unknowns and all its issues, all the things that we got to figure out. I think I explained this in teaching one and teaching two, and I explained the danger with the brand new paths that we forge in terms of spiritual knowledge. Spiritual knowledge is very dangerous for new wines. New wines are very dangerous when it comes to spiritual knowledge. Brand new paths, trashing the traditions of the past, abandoning the thousands and thousands of years of wisdom of the past that has been proven through the laboratory of human experience for thousands and thousands of years, and opting for brand new brave methods that we is very dangerous. But when it comes to physical knowledge, science, that's exactly what you need. You need to always question the past, and in most cases trash the knowledge of the past and forge new brave paths. When it comes to science, of course, you're going to follow fundamental principles. But so Hechel, this word here, Hechel, actually says that points that men began to abandon and trash and renounce all the wisdom of the ancestors, all the wisdom that were handed down from God through Adam, and they began to abandon this wisdom of the past, and they were forging a new path, a new kind of morality, a new kind of ethics and values. And then the next word, so Hekel, I hope you've understood this. So Hekel, by Hekel, this word appearing in Hebrew in this verse, and if you were reading it in Hebrew and you were Hebrew literate to an extent, by the time you saw this word Hekel, you know what is being told here, you know what is being hinted here. And we are being told that man at this point in time is departing from tradition, is departing from all that wisdom that had been handed since Adam, and he is now experimenting with something new. Now, the other word is larov. Larov is a very interesting word. Larov, for example, it appears in Genesis chapter 13, verse 7. I'll read it for you. It says, "And there was a quarrel." That word there for quarrel is Genesis 13, verse 7. "And there was a quarrel." That word there for quarrel is the word rov or larov, between the shepherds of Abram and the shepherds of Lot. Now, so you get the idea. So larov actually means to quarrel, to become argumentative, you know. Now, so this is what this verse is telling us. It's telling us that men with no moral framework, men with no a particular system of order, their minds keep changing about what is good and evil based on their emotions and physical and bodily urges. Men with no moral framework, men with no guiding principles and values of morality. These men who also happen to be very argumentative, but of course, what do you expect with men that have no source of authoritative truth and wisdom? They tend to become argumentative on everything that is presented to them. They have more questions than they have answers, and they love their questions more than any answers that could ever be provided for them. In the world of this kind of men, and there were beautiful women around. So what do you think will happen with a world with this kind of men and then there are beautiful women around? Now you can imagine what is going to happen in a world of men with no stability, with no moral conscience, with no moral framework, and men who have no strength except thuggishness and brute physical strength. This kind of men, what do you think would happen in the world? Like I think I mentioned, or I'm not sure I did in this teaching, but let me do it now. One of the Hebrew word for father, Av, actually points to the idea that the father is the strong man of the house. He provides a pillar of stability and morality in the house. No, but we have men who were not moral pillars in the world, men who had just only physical brute and thuggishness. And this is the kind of world in which we live. Now, this is the kind of world that is being described here. Now, uh, and let's go a little bit further and we before we come back again. Now, verse 2, Genesis 6, verse 2, it says, and the sons of God, actually, let me read it in a more in translation that is more closer to the Hebrew. It says, and this translation says, and the sons of the lords saw the daughters of men that they were good, and they married for themselves wives from all they chose. Now, the key word that I want you to note here is the word wrongly and horribly mistranslated in a lot of our English Bibles as the sons of God. As to that, the sons of God, like the God. And so I want you to take note of that. This is what I want to discuss now. And then also for the word marriage used in that verse, we're going to discuss what that word is. Okay, now before that, we've said, now it bears repeating, we've said that the word Hekel, it says, and it came to pass that when men began Hekel to trash traditions, to move away from God and the traditions of the past, and from the authoritative source of moral values and so on. And these men became argumentative, and there were beautiful daughters, beautiful women around. Now, one of the meanings of the word Hekel in the Hebrew Bible, or in the Bible and in Hebrew, is the word for secular. So otherwise it could be saying that men were leaving spiritual values and becoming more secular or materialistic. And we're going to see the same excuse me, problem again when we reach the story of the Tower of Babel, the ultimate climax of materialism, and why it is that God had to save humanity again by stopping the Tower from being built and by mixing the language of the tongue of many. Now, so this is now, at this point, I want to talk about who the sons of God were. Now, imagine these people coming out of Egypt. In Egypt, who were the sons of God in Egypt? They were the pharaohs. They were powerful people, wealthy and powerful people who commanded from their position. They commanded great power over great masses of people, that masses of people obeyed them because of their great power or wealth or influence. For example, you know of the pharaoh that they call him Tutankhamun. Now, Tutankhamun actually in Egyptian language means son of the god Thoth. So that's an example of a pharaoh, because pharaohs were believed to be sons of God, as in God was their father. They're not actually human. They were thought of to be kind of like a hybrid, half human, half God, or descendants of God, direct descendants of God. And in that Egyptian sense, the pharaohs or the sons of God were the powerful and influential people in society. And this is not talking about spiritual beings or fallen angels. This is not what this verse is talking about. The sons of God here are referring to powerful and influential and people, men, powerful, influential men in society. It's like what we have today in the UK, lords. Now, imagine writing a book that will be read, say, in the next 500 or 1000 years, where the idea is that there was some class of people in society that were called lords because of their privileged status. Now imagine somebody reading it and then covering it with a lot of religious thinking and thinking that, oh, means the lords, that means some heavenly beings were actually living in the UK and they were members of the government and members of the royalty were actually heavenly supernatural beings. No, this is not the idea here. The idea is just like how we would use the word lords in England, or even we have terms like this in Hebrew. Hebrew always employs this kind of language, like so the word sons of freedom, speaking of sons that are free, or sons of light, and so on. All those things doesn't mean that they are literally sons of light. And so this is the idea here, that the word translated sons of God is a mistranslation. It's referring to powerful men, strong men, and great influential and wealthy men. And these men abused women. These men in the world, powerful men, abused women without voice. They took the daughters of the ordinary men, the men that had no power, no influence, and we're going to look at this now. And they did whatever they needed to do with them. Some of the things that were happening was that some of these daughters of ordinary men, before they had to get married to whatever they had to get married, they had to do some sexual favors for one of these powerful lords before they can go do whatever they need to do with their husband. So the powerful lord will have to first have the privilege to go to the woman. No, not have the privilege. The woman will have the privilege. These beautiful women of ordinary men who would have the privilege for the powerful lord to first of all defile her before she can get married to her own husband. And these are some of the things that were happening back then. And then it also paints the picture of men who married for reasons that were not the best of reasons. We saw what Lamech already did here, already separated sex from reproduction. These men married for mainly physical reasons of pleasure and power and prestige, forgetting the other reason, reproduction, which comes with a lot of responsibility. So you can see what is going on here. And so let's look at verse 3. Verse 3, let me read it from the NIV. It says that, then the Lord said, my spirit will not contend with man forever, for he is mortal. His days will be 120 years. Now, what is this saying? In the Hebrew, what is actually being said here is that God is saying a human being is neither angel nor animal. Now, this is not what God is saying in the verse. I want to give you a background understanding before I say what the verse is saying. A human being is neither angel nor animal. A human being is like the rider and the horse. The rider being the person's spirit. It says, if you read in Genesis, it says that God breathed into man the breath of life. He made his body from the dust of the ground, and then he breathed a part of him, his spiritual being, into the man, and then man became an entity known as the living soul. Now, so the rider is the spirit of man, the spirit part of man, and the horse is the body, the physical part of man. Now imagine a little child that doesn't know better. The first time the little child sees a man riding a horse, and imagine the little child thinks within themselves that, oh, poor man, look at that big giant animal. It's just carrying that man to wherever it wants to go, and the man is so helpless on the back of the animal, and the animal is just running around with the man to wherever. But you know better that that's really not what is happening. It is the little man on top of that massive creature, that powerful stallion, controlling the stallion, the human body, and with all its physical urges and all its animalistic instincts. Is a very powerful beast. But there is a spiritual part, which is the rider that controls and wields it. But unfortunately, there are times when the spiritual part, the physical part, becomes dominant, and then it takes control. And so in Hebrew, what is being said here is that the animal part of man is beginning to is contending with the spiritual part of man, to the extent that the animal part is winning and is almost taking over, is to dominate. the spiritual part. The animal part is almost dominating the spiritual part. Now this is going to be more clearer for you as we're going to read the same thing in the second Sedra. Now just a moment, I'm going to hint on what that is because I don't think we'll be able to treat that this week, but I'm going to hint it. Let me continue. So God says in this verse 3 that he's going to give man 120 years to correct his ways. And that is what the 120 years is actually being said in the Hebrew, that okay, now there's this battle going on. The physical side of, or the animal side is trying to dominate the spiritual side of man. It seems like even the spiritual force that God imputed in man is becoming weak and not strong to restrain the forces of the animal sides that the people are nurturing and cultivating and encouraging to take over. So God says, I give them 120 years to correct their ways. Now the Sedra draws to an end. If you read in verse 4, it says, afterwards, when the sons of the Lord came to the daughters of men. Now we're going to look at the Hebrew words for marriage. Before that, even you're going to, if you're reading in the Hebrew, you're going to see that as we get into the second Sedra, there are two names of God in Hebrew. One is the name that is often associated with God's strict personality when God is acting in his justice, in strictness and justice, and is the name Elohim or Elohim, depending on how you want to transliterate it. So Elohim or Elohim is the name of God that is associated with justice, with strict justice. Now God has another name which is Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, or Adonai, with the circumlocution of the name which is Adonai, and that name is the name of God associated with God's merciful attributes. Now we see the first Sedra where God is giving them 120 years and God is reporting on what is happening. The name of God being used there is the name that is associated with mercy, Yahweh or Adonai. And then interestingly also, the name that is used to describe man is Ha-Adam, or the general name for mankind, Ha-Adam or Adama. Now, and even the word for marriage that is used in chapter 6 verse 2 is the same word that is used in marriage in Genesis chapter 2. So in verse 2, the Hebrew word used for marriage, vahiku, is the word that is used in the Torah in most cases for marriage. But you see that God gives them 120 years to correct their ways, and things get worse. That if you see in verse 4, where it says also, it says the Nephilims were there, and also afterwards we're going to talk about the Nephilims next week, who exactly they were. And it says that the sons of the Lord came to the daughters of men. Now it uses another word which is not the word for marriage, is the word for take, like to rape, to seize, to take. On powerful men seize and take advantage of women, just take these women. And you could look at our culture today. It seems as if the man with the power and the money get the girls. They take the girls. Why they feel not well? Anyway, that's by the way. And then so I said that in the first Sedra, as the first Sedra begins to draw to an end, the name of God used in the first Sedra, in the English these differences don't show, but in the Hebrew, if you're reading, you clearly see the difference. The name of God used in the first Sedra as it draws to an end is the name of God's, the name that is associated with God's attribute of mercy. But when we go to the second Sedra, God's name changes to the name that is attributed to judgment, because now he's giving them 120 years, but to correct their ways. And within that 120 years, things are happening. We're going to look at what is happening with Noah and his family. And we're going to look at what is happening. God is encouraging them to change their ways. As a matter of fact, Peter talks about Noah being a preacher of righteousness. At that time, Noah is trying to tell them to change their ways. Now, but things got worse, and the name of man, we said in the first Sedra, man is called Ha-Adam. The general name for man is a dignified name. It's the name that God called man, one of the names that God called man when he created man in Genesis chapter 1 and 2. But now, the name for man in the second Sedra, we're going to look at this detailedly next week. I'm hinting this because I don't want to start this new topic because we'll not be able to get far into it this week. So I just want to hint to them. The name for man changes to Basar, and is the word for flesh, animal. That man has fallen so much that he's just Basar, flesh, an animal. And you could see the difference in the second Sedra. And so these are some of the changes that begins to happen in both the first and these changes in the second Sedra. The second Sedra, like I said, begins from Genesis chapter 6 verse 9. And so we're going to look at these next week, and then next week we're also going to hopefully look at why it is that Noah was chosen in the first place, and why is it that in the first Sedra it talks about Noah begat, it says Noah begat Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Now in the second Sedra it repeats the same information but with a little change. And if you're reading in the English, and if you don't have the understanding I just gave you about scripture, that every word is meaningful, there's a reason for everything. Scripture doesn't waste words. God's blueprint for reality doesn't waste words. There are no redundancies. There's nothing there just for being there. You know, it's not like Shakespeare. How many of you have ever read a novel, especially modern novels? There are a lot of irrelevant details, like the wind was breezy, and then there was this the backdrop of the city, and then there was a shadow cast on the city because of the position of the moon, and all those kind of details. No, who really cares? I just want to get into the characters and see what happens to the characters. All that extraneous description of the background of what is of the scene usually bores me, really bores me. And so you could ignore all those extraneous descriptions, all the extraneous descriptions about the the character had a grin on their face as they walk closer to this and that and that and that and that. You just want to get, you could ignore all that and still get the fullness of the story. But with scripture, you cannot ignore even the begats and think you would understand exactly what is going on. So he talks about that Noah begat Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Now in the second Sedra, it says Noah begat three sons. Then he goes on to list them: Shem, Ham, and Japheth. What is happening there? Very, very powerful, interesting stuff, which we're going to explain next week. Another thing that we're hopefully going to be able to explain next week is, if you read the dimensions of the ark that God asked Noah to build, it says the length of it is going to be 300 measures, the height of it is going to be 50 measures, and then it says the width of it was going to be 30 measures. I think that was the measurement he gave. Now, but if you want to translate that measure, the ark would be like the equivalent of a shoe box, a big shoe box. I mean, it's just a small carton, like relatively big carton, but a carton that I myself can lift up with my hand and carry. It's not going to survive. It cannot even walk on a simple river or a sea, not to talk of saving the world from a massive, saving a couple of people with millions of animals or hundreds of thousands of animals, or how many animals they are, whatever, how many they are. And like today, they have discovered over, if Noah was to take male and female for every species of animal, and today we've discovered millions of species of different animals, so literally millions of animals were going to enter that ark. Even if we are to take the exaggerated measures, which makes the ark bigger, like the 300 measures, the equivalent of close to 1,000,000 meters or something, it still will not suffice to carry all those animals and the people. Now, the sages, the Hebrew sages, thousands of years ago had figured what those numbers mean. And you would be amazed to see that the numbers, Hebrew words, have numerical values. And you will see that the dimensions of the ark somehow is it's exactly equal to a certain computations of the numerical values of the numbers that spells God's name, the attributes of God's name that has to do with mercy. And we're going to look at that next week, how the dimensions of the ark, God was not giving us architectural blueprints to hopefully someday in future we build another ark. That was not the purpose of those dimensions being written in the Torah. The purpose was to demonstrate an important message that we're going to see next week. And then we're going to talk about who the Nephilims were, the Nephilims. It says, and the fallen ones were on earth, and then they were, and after they were also there. So we're going to end today here because we cannot start a new subject. And I end with the question I asked at the beginning: can men on their own come up with a system of morality that will provide stability, order, and prosperity? I want you to hold that question in your mind throughout this week. I want you to think about it as much as you can, and really think about it. And about the 6 questions I asked you, you want to go back to the beginning and read those questions again, and think about them, and really think about them, and try to see how you can answer those questions for yourselves. So shalom, my dear friends. May Abba bless you with his goodness. May he make his face to shine upon you, and may you have a favored and a glorious week until we discuss again next week the amazing insights from God's wonderful revelation to us. Shalom. Be blessed.